All right, well, thank you everyone for getting up for an 8:15 a.m. talk. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and this is awesome. So we're going to talk a bit today about Project Zero. That's the current project that I'm looking after at Google. But before we get into Project Zero, we're going to take a little step back in time, and we're going to look at what things looked like and some observations we were making before we formed Project Zero. And we're going to talk about those observations and understand that making some observations is what led us to form Project Zero. And I think these are quite interesting observations to go and talk about, because I'm sure most of you in this room here will at least understand what the observations are trying to say and possibly agree with them. But not everyone is aware of some of the things we were observing. And I think this is important because some of these observations are not immediately obvious. And if you don't take them on board, you might find yourself making suboptimal decisions for security, for the security of your company. And that's, we think that's unfortunate. So the first observation that we made in the run-up to forming Project Zero is we really believe that offensive security research being done in the open is drying up. That's to say that year on year, less and less of the top offensive research is being done and published in the open. The factors behind that are fairly obvious. There's been a big infusion of cash from the private space for research that's done in the private and generally doesn't see the light of day. And that's one of the forces that's leading to research done in the open drying up. And we think this is a problem. We think that if there's less offensive security research being done in the open, then we might start to think, hey, things are looking really good. We're not seeing much good offensive security research going on. Maybe we're doing really well as defenders. I don't think that's actually true, but I think there's a danger that we might start to conclude that if offensive security research done in the open continues to dry up. So this is one of the things we decided we wanted to tackle with the formation of Project Zero. The second observation is that targeted attacks using Odays are on the increase. This is actually quite a hard assertion to make generally, but recently it seems like the defenders have had a bit of a rally and detected quite a few targeted attacks using Oday. So it's now easier to give data saying that these things are on the increase. We're seeing like one of the sponsors here, FireEye, seem to be doing quite well recently at detecting some targeted Oday attacks. So we definitely got the data to say they're on the increase. Sorry, I lost my thread. So what do we do with this observation? What we do is I've forgotten what I was going to say, so we'll move to observation 3. We will come back to that. Observation 3 is a continuation of sort of the theme, but mass malware Odays are actually getting rarer. There was one earlier this year that surprised me because we hadn't seen a mass malware Oday attack for a long time, so it was a surprise to see one earlier this year, but generally they're getting pretty rare. And again, this is another sort of loss of data theme. When there is a mass malware Oday using attack that goes on, it's a pretty noisy thing, so it gets detected, right? And that's good for defenders. When we detect something, we get data. We can use that data to move forward and to fix things, and so on. I think I may have remembered what I was trying to get into on observation number 2. So the danger here is that you run your security program based on what you can see. And what you can see is the mass malware Odays, they're getting rarer. What you can see is the APTs using targeted Odays that get caught. They're not the best ones, obviously, because they got caught. So what we do see in this space is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot going on that we don't see. And what you need to do as a defender is have confidence in the assertion that there's all this stuff going on that you're not seeing and act as if that's present. And by doing so, you might make some good progress. If you act just based on what you see, you might make incorrect decisions. And to give a concrete example here, one thing that we think is true is that when the defender finds some vulnerability, chances are, because of the asymmetry between amount of cash for private offensive research versus amount of cash and resources for public offensive research, the latter being smaller, chances are that when a defender finds a bug, it's already known to the attackers. And that leads, once you realize that observation, that leads to some new behaviors. For example, you might suddenly realize that when you become aware of a bug, maybe you should patch it quickly because chances are there's some other actors that are aware of the same bug. So those are the observations, and the sort of combination of those observations led us to think, well, is there something we can do to help combat some of the problems inherent in some of those observations? So enter Project Zero. Our mission statement is make Oday hard. There's kind of an implication in that mission statement, which is that we don't think Oday is hard. And I think the evidence is there that Oday is not hard. Just in the news recently, we've seen well, the hacking team attack has been big in the news recently. They're not the stealthiest, most top-tier actor, and yet they have access to 0-day. Therefore, maybe that means they're not hard. We're getting a lot of detection of nation-state A versus nation-state B Odays. And there's a lot of different players there. You could name quite a few countries. Since everyone seems to have these things, maybe we can conclude that they're not hard. So our mission statement, we want to try and make them hard. This isn't something we think we can do alone. Some people mistakenly think that we're going to charge to battle and sort this problem out ourselves. Of course, we're not going to. We're a relatively small team, but we do think there is a significant piece we can play in the wider community of people trying to make Oday hard, and we're going to get into that. So this is Project Zero's current identity. Before I describe it, it's a fluid identity. I think our mission statement is probably going to remain the same over time, but how we go about accomplishing that mission, well, that's subject to change. The way we're currently going about accomplishing that mission is we've decided to become an attack research team. So that means we do vulnerability research, we develop exploits, we do all of this in public. That's important. We think that if we do this as a community and layer on top of each other's work, we have the best chance of actually getting some success in this space. We're not just an attack research team, or to put it another way, we think that you can defend the best when you understand attack in great detail. So we're trying to get to the stage where we understand the attack in great detail, and when we do that, we think then we'll be in a good position to sort of take a step back and design some defenses that will stop the best attacks that we think we're capable of doing. So that's what we're doing currently. So I build this team. So we're going to link back to some of these observations, but one thing we're really excited to do is provide what we think is a pretty dream job for the top-tier offensive security researchers. And if I sort of go back to observation number one, offensive security research done in the open is drying up. Well, we can directly counter that by providing some jobs where people who are the best at this get to do offensive security research in the open. We think that's a pretty... If you look at the situation before Project Zero, you often find that people who are the best at offensive security research, they do what they do primarily because they love what they do. So they're going to find somewhere to do that. The question is, what opportunities do they have? Well, there's lots of opportunity in the private space, and now Project Zero adds an additional compelling option, we believe, in the public space. We see ourselves as a source of data. If we do nothing but just sort of churn out bugs and exploits, we want to do more than that, as I covered briefly earlier, but if that's all we did, that would be quite a valuable source of data, we think. And we're already seeing a lot of people in the defensive community looking at some of our attacks and thinking, that's really interesting, I hadn't thought of that, but maybe I can think of a defense against that. And we've seen various things, and there are people working on papers that cites our work, and we like the thought of being a source of data that just enables the defenders to think about things where otherwise the data source may have been drying up. We're not just a technical team. Our mission statement doesn't say we're just a technical team, it says make Oday hard, so obviously we can consider non-technical measures to try and make Oday hard. And one thing we're doing sort of on the side of our technical work is we want to be a progressive influence on the industry. If you were being a bit cynical, we could say that we've been trying some of the same things for 20 years in our industry, and the Odays are still coming in. So maybe there's room to try some new things, some different things, and we're definitely going to be doing that. And we're going to get into one of the things we've been trying a bit later. But just to say that we're not purely a technical team. We're sort of a whatever it takes team. So if we think of some economic or political lever we can pull that will make Oday harder, then yeah, we'll invest some resources in investigating that. So what sort of things are we doing at the moment to make Oday hard? So, and this is back to some of the technical work, but we do think there is an opportunity to tweak the economy of vulnerabilities and bug sales. We think there's there are a few too many what we would call obvious bugs out there. That means that there's bugs out there in software that could be found in a fairly small amount of time by someone who has some experience in this area, and that's no good. So by mopping up the obvious bugs, we want to at least make sure that someone who does enter this space has to be quite talented, and that we think will tweak the economy a little bit once we've done a couple of rounds of trying to mop up obvious bugs. When we talk about the economy of the situation, we talk about bug collisions. So this is where we do some research and we find a bug and we get it fixed, and it turns out that some other APT actor had that bug. That's called a bug collision, and that's expensive for the APT because they have to go and buy another one of these things, and they're getting quite expensive now. This is something we do track. It's something we don't publish too many details on because some of the sources of information that come into us about when we do and do not collide with nation state A or B are a little bit sensitive, but it happens and has happened with multiple different actors. We've collided with their bugs, and that's quite appealing to us. We covered making a better job for the best defensive researchers, but that's also an economy thing. If we take someone from the private space into the public space, we've lowered the supply on the private side and increased the supply on the public side. So aside from mopping up obvious bugs, we are investing in mitigations. We haven't published much in this space yet, but we have some things coming up we're quite excited about. Tooling is another area that we're working on, and scale. The fact that we're currently doing this at Google is awesome. It's like if we have some computational process or some fuzz run we want to do, and we want to do it across 10,000 machines to get good results in a day, then we can get 10,000 machines with the press of a button. So that's quite nice that we've got that scale available to us. Hopefully we can outscale some of the lower tier attackers, certainly, particularly when we're mopping up some of the obvious bugs. We want to be a force multiplier. This is a theme I keep coming back to, but by sharing this data, we think that we can enable other people that are trying to defend that otherwise might not have this data because it's drying up. And again, industry change will come into we'll discuss, or at least one of the big industry changes we're trying to affect shortly. So to dive sort of deeper down from the mission statement down towards our technical strategies. Currently our technical strategy, we call them the two pincers. We're pursuing this strategy. It's subject to change. We'll probably reevaluate it every year, but currently we have this two-pincer strategy. The first pincer is called eliminating low-hanging fruit, and this is back to mopping up what we call the obvious bugs. Currently, we think it's just too easy to take some popular, well-used software, run a fuzzer across it, and get some bugs. That's not a huge investment for someone to do, and so that's really uncool that we're still in this position as an industry. So we are trying to eliminate this low-hanging fruit, and we're going to try and do it by utilizing some of the machine resources I discussed earlier. Like when we fuzz something, we're going to use 10,000 machines instead of maybe the people we're competing against, have got fewer machines, or they're just doing it in their basement in some cases. So yeah, we're going to try and bring an end to dumb fuzzing just by using our scale and being thorough, and just sweeping across all of the popular software that people are using, of ubiquitous software platforms as named here. That's ongoing. There's a lot of software to sweep over to eliminate low-hanging fruit, but we're trying to crank through that as best we can. We'll see whether we're being successful or not in a minute by looking at some of the numbers we're hitting. The other technical strategy pincer is perhaps more interesting. We call it the last step of the bug chain. So one of the areas where the industry has done well recently is if you want to compromise someone's machine, a lot of the advanced attacks that we're seeing involve multiple bugs to achieve a compromise of a target. Typically two. Two is multiple, it's more than one, but it's better than one. But this is a testament to the rise of sandboxing primarily. So a lot of the software that we all rely on day in, day out, and there's on the front line of the internet, things like web browsers and so on. Most of them now are sandboxed. So as an attacker, if you want to completely compromise someone's machine, you have to get your foot in the front door by compromising the browser, and then you're in this sandbox environment, and depending on the operating system, you'll need another bug to bust out of the sandbox and get full control of the target's machine. So the last step of the bug chain is this sandbox breakout that generally attackers need. And the interesting thing here is, in our experience of these two bugs in the bug chain, the browser and then the sandbox breakout, it's harder to break out of the sandbox. And we see this in many cases, like even in the pricing data, how much does it cost to buy a sandbox escape versus buy like a flash vulnerability? To an extent, the pricing tells you how hard each of these things are, but also just intuitively, like a browser is a huge attack surface, whereas a good sandbox has a relatively small attack surface, meaning that there are only a limited number of avenues by which you might start trying to break out of it. So therefore, we think the last step of the bug chain, the bugs there have higher contention. What this means is there are fewer of them. That means that when we research in this area and we find bugs there, there's a higher chance of bug collision. We covered that as an important economic aspect earlier. And the sorts of targets we research here are the kernel and parts of the sandbox. And by focusing on this last step of the bug chain, focusing resource here, we think we can have some benefit because we don't really need to eliminate all of the bugs. We just need to break the bug chain so that it's hard to get full compromise of someone. And we can do that by focusing on the area where there are fewer bugs and less opportunities to break out. So if you look through some of our publications and our bug findings to date, you'll see quite a few of them are operating system kernel issues because that's one way you can break out of a sandbox, and we're trying to sweep that clean. So how do we choose what software we're going to work on? What specific named pieces of software we're going to work on? Well, we sort of mix in lots of inputs and come up with a fairly obvious answer, actually, but I'll just go into what the inputs are. Obviously, observed attacks are very interesting. If the defenders, we actually catch someone attacking someone in the wild, well, that's a very interesting data point that says, this target is of interest to attackers. This target is the way that someone might get their foot into the door of an organization. Therefore, that kind of would make us inclined to bump up the priority of that target. External feedback. Like I said, there are various people that feed information to us. That's pretty helpful in targeting what we're going to work on. And also internal deduction. It's quite surprising how this works so well, actually, but we often just sit down over lunch and have a thought exercise. So if we want to break out of the Chrome sandbox on Windows, how are we going to do that? And we sort of brainstorm it, and we say, we'd look at this area, we'd look for a bug here, we'd do that, and then we spin up a project to go and find bugs in that area. And time again, we find that the real attackers are thinking very similarly to us because attackers often follow similar, the path of least resistance, the path of most obvious path to finding a bug. So time and time again, we find that the things we're working on are the things that real attackers are using. For example, in the recent hacking team disclosure, they had a couple of Odays, and both of those Odays were very similar areas to areas where we currently have projects ongoing to try and eliminate Odays. So it's a fair bet that we probably would have bug collided with at least one of those given a bit more time. So given what we're seeing and mixing all of these inputs together, there's a lot of pwnage going on out there against client-side endpoints. So I don't know, if your goal is to steal something from an organization, it's getting less common to sort of hammer at the front door and try and break into servers directly. It's much more common to just break into someone's actual machine on their desk, and then from there sort of have a look around the corporation and spread from there. So putting it all together, we're looking at these named pieces of software here, and these are the pieces. These are the things, the software you have running in your pocket, Android and iOS. Everyone that's got a laptop out is probably running either Windows OS X or Linux. Although this is the time where one person excitedly says I'm running Plan 9 or something, but generally. BSD, yes, we have someone that's not running one of those three. Thank you. That's external feedback. Second bullet point top. We'll factor that in to our next round of discussions about what targets to go and have a look at. Thank you. Browsers, of course. For some reason, we've missed out Safari there, but that is also of interest. All of the popular browsers are of interest. They're certainly of significant interest to attackers, so they're of interest to us. And also, a lot of attacks occur via documents, like Office documents, PDFs for Adobe Reader. So we'll look at that too. And I don't think this list here will come as a surprise to anyone. When in a couple of weeks' time the next big incident kicks off, chances are it'll be one of these pieces of software listed here that was the foot in the door for that incident. So results, to save anyone, people always ask this question, so I answer it in the presentation, but one of the most common questions is, how many bugs have you dealt with since the formation of Project Zero? So the number there is 427. I think that's quite a large number. A lot of that comes from the eliminating low-hanging fruit technical pincer that we covered earlier. Because it's low-hanging fruit, by definition, there's kind of a fair amount of it, so we're up to 427 bugs so far. A lot of that's from big fuzz runs. We've published 25 blog posts, mainly technical ones. Some of those we're quite proud of. We're getting quite a following on the blog as being a source of high-quality, offensive research done in the open, as is one of our team goals. We've probably the one you're most likely to have heard of there is we had a guest post on some DRAM research called Rowhammer. That saw quite a bit of attention because that was not a software vulnerability, but a hardware-assisted vulnerability, so that was quite interesting. I'll give out the blog address later if anyone wants to follow it. And this pie chart is a breakdown of where we found the bugs that we found, broken down by vendor. This pie chart is not necessarily indicative of how we've allocated our effort. It's indicative of where we found the results, so it's kind of a mix of where we put the effort and how many bugs there are in a given product. So the largest chunk of that pie is probably due to some pretty heavy investment we've put into Adobe Flash. Again, that comes from external feedback. We should look at Flash, not to over-mention FireEye, but I think over the past month or two they've caught some actual real Flash Odays being used, so that's external feedback, that's observed attacks. That's all that was factored into why that blue piece of our pie chart is so large. We've been doing a lot of work on Apple operating systems, particularly on the sandbox escape area of things. We found that perhaps the kernel there wasn't so robust as we'd hoped for a component that's on the front line of defense against sandbox escape, so we've done some work there and found quite a few bugs. Microsoft have a big chunk of the pie, of course, because that's a very important platform used by a lot of people. That's what we found so far. That brings us on to disclosure deadlines. Again, this is in the deck because it's something everyone asks about. It was briefly a hot topic earlier this year. And this is one of the non-technical pieces of work that we're doing in Project Zero. I mentioned earlier that we do have some non-technical components to Project Zero. So we use a disclosure deadline. What is a disclosure deadline? That's where when we send a vulnerability to a vendor, we say, well, after a certain amount of time, we believe that the right of people to know about the risk exceeds your right to take a long time fixing something. And we've calibrated that deadline currently 90 days. We've calibrated that to something we think is achievable and we'll look at the data of how achievable that is in a minute. I say currently 90 days because as the industry starts to do better and better, guess what we're going to do to that number? We're going to ratchet it down. And skipping a bullet point here, but we want faster patch response times. I think everyone is pro faster patch response times. But just to remind ourselves of why, it comes back to one of the observations we made earlier. We're kind of acknowledging that in the current state of the industry, when the defender finds a bug, just because of the weighting of this many attackers, this many defenders, chances are that the attackers already know about every bug that defenders are coming across. So once we acknowledge that, we were like, whoa, yes, we want faster patch response time to limit the window of exposure in days for every bug that we find. We think this is starting to become an industry norm. We were delighted, this was a long time ago now, but when people started coming to us, to Google, with discoveries against some of Google's products and saying, hey, there's a 90-day deadline on this, we were delighted. That means that this idea is catching on, and we're seeing that more and more, and later on I have a slide that encourages researchers to do this, and I'll issue that encouragement after we cover some data that I think shows that this is effective. So yes, let's get into some results of disclosure deadlines. So this is how things used to be in March 2015 when we ran the stats and first started talking about this. And this pie chart here shows that for all the vulnerabilities were sent to all the vendors, what percentage achieved the 90-day deadline and what percentage missed. So even our initial attempt at this, before we iterated on it and tweaked it, wasn't far off. Like 90 days was well calibrated, we think, because we got an 85% success rate. But not perfect. There's a bit of red there. So some people were having trouble hitting 90-day deadline. So we tweaked our policies. We probably getting ahead of myself there, but we decided that we looked at all the misses of this deadline, and they were all really close to 90 days. So perhaps we're just a few days off in our initial guess of 90 days being a good starting point. So we added this concept of a grace period, where if you almost make 90 days, but not quite because you've got a patch coming up a week later, we added something we call a grace period, which is up to 14 days. And that resulted in this. I think there are two things that resulted in this pie chart. One is our grace period addition, and the other, I think, was people realizing that we were serious about this and taking these deadlines a bit more seriously. And the combined effect of these two things is that genuine deadline exceeded, like failed to meet 90 days to patch something, is now, the percentage isn't showing, which is annoying, but it's pretty small. This grace period is represented by orange here, has kind of pushed things over the edge. Like almost all people getting disclosure deadline bugs are now hitting that deadline. Actually look specifically into what went wrong with that little piece of red. That represents actually 4 bugs, just 4 bugs. And each one has a unique story that seems that it's not that huge a deal that the deadline was missed. Like, for example, one was not a very serious bug, and an attempt was made to patch the bug within deadline, just that the patch wasn't correct. So that sort of that almost doesn't count. I forgot what the other cases were, but it's almost like people aren't missing deadlines anymore when you actually look beyond the stats and beyond the pie chart and look at the individual deadline misses. It's almost like disclosure deadlines are something that, as an industry, it turns out we can do them. So we're quite happy with how that's worked out.
How long does it take from notification that there's a vulnerability? Don't you have to verify the vulnerability?
So the question is, I'm not sure I got the question, is don't we have to verify the vulnerability? You mean verify that it was fixed?
No, verify that there is a vulnerability.
So what we do is we find a vulnerability, and we don't send a vulnerability to someone and start the deadline clock ticking unless we're sure that it's a vulnerability, using our own resources. Usually it's pretty obvious when you found a vulnerability and when you haven't.
I'm just thinking that if it comes external to you, if somebody finds a vulnerability and is reported to you from the outside, how long does it take you to verify that the vulnerability really exists?
Okay, that's a good question. Again, I'll just repeat that on the mic for people that might not have heard it. But what about the time I think you're saying it takes for the vendor receiving a report to verify that the vulnerability is as described, is real, is correct? That's a really good question. So we talked about this before we started doing this, and we decided one way that we wanted to make it easy for someone receiving a vulnerability to do the right thing. And the way you do that is, to the best of our ability, we submit very high quality reports. So we're not talking about a few paragraphs where we describe some abstract condition and claim it's a vulnerability. If we're, for example, we've got some good reports against Microsoft Office that I think demonstrate good quality reports. So the report is like, open Microsoft Office, this file is the proof of concept file. You open this file in this version of Office, again, in this version of Windows, you will see a crash. And we try to be fairly diligent in verifying that we reliably demonstrate a condition. More than that, we then go and say, and here's what the crash looks like in the debugger, and here's the assembly conditions around the crash demonstrating that there's adverse impact to this crash condition that we found. And we try to give the real package so that it's easy for a security engineer receiving the report who also understands in-depth security to look at it and say, yes, rubber stamped, this is a good report. And if we ever send a bad report to anyone here and you think it's bad, yeah, call us on it. We want our quality of report to be good so that there's minimal time in arguing about whether something represents a vulnerability or not. Thanks for the question. On to final thoughts. Things you might want to take away. I'm actually not sure what the breakdown here is in the audience of researchers versus software vendors versus hopefully some progressive companies too. But if there are any researchers here, I think there's compelling evidence here to say that the disclosure deadlines work in terms of actually they're achievable. And also we think we have the data and industry context to say that disclosure deadlines help by limiting exposure of bugs that statistically are known to attackers. So if you're a researcher, please consider using a disclosure deadline. Try it once. If you don't like it, don't do it next time. But it's something you might consider trying. Later this year, we're going to try and expand Project Zero, right? There's only so much we can do as a little team in one company. We think this is an umbrella under which people can rally, right? Research done in the open, research for the benefit of the public internet. We think there's some form of rallying banner here under the Project Zero umbrella. So we're going to be inviting people to join us more and more. And I don't necessarily have the mechanics of what we're going to do or say because we haven't planned it yet, but just that we're going to do something here. We really want to get a community going that's more than just one little team in one company. So if that sort of very vague sales pitch appeals to you at all, get in touch. Come and talk to me afterwards. Even give me ideas if you're willing to on what this might look like if we expanded this to be an industry-wide thing. Very happy to get feedback here. Actually, these last 2 bullet points are kind of the same. This is an edit I made to the slides like just before I gave this talk, and I seem to have just duplicated myself. But we also think there's room for like every company who relies on the security of the open internet, on the security of common endpoint software. We think why doesn't every company have a team that's doing this, that's just trying to look out for the security of all of us? I mean, that's another way that we could have more people under this Project Zero umbrella. I mean, we're not doing that well as defenders, right? I mean, there's attacks going around, flying around all the time, and 0-day this, 0-day that. So shouldn't we all be investing more resource, especially if we depend on the internet for our business? I think there's a business case to be made there that every company that is big enough to have a big security team should have some percentage of that security team just hiring the best and just letting them do what they think needs to be done. I think there's a case to be made there. So if there are any progressive companies here that are interested in getting into this, then I'm very open to collaboration. Just come and talk to me. So if you want to follow what we're doing, anytime we do something interesting, we try and have a rule that we blog about it. Mostly this is a blog that is full of what we think is high-quality attack research, so but done in public for the public. So if you want to go and look at what we're doing, you can just subscribe to the blog. If you want to subscribe to what we're doing on a much more fine-grained level of detail, you can actually go and subscribe to our bug tracker. So whenever we publish any vulnerability, typically we do that when they're fixed, you can in real time see when we do that. It's going to be noisy if you do that. Like we've got 427 bugs on file, so you're going to get a lot of updates. But if you're interested in what's going on, that's something else you can subscribe to. We're hiring. If you're interested in coming and doing top-tier attack research in the open, come and talk to me. With that, yeah, I'd be really happy to take any questions that anyone had. At the front here.
For the ESET vulnerability you guys found, there's an update to their scan engine. Does that fix the vulnerability you guys uncovered?
Okay, so the question was, we recently did a publication on our blog about a vulnerability in the ESET antivirus engine. Is that fixed? Yes, we did the blog post after the fix was live. And antivirus engines, turns out they're quite aggressive at auto-updating their signatures. So within a very short amount of time after ESET fixed and pushed the vulnerability, everyone had the fix. So at that point, we published our blog post on that research. One more question?
Regarding disclosures at the end of your timeline, you guys do that, I assume, through your blog. Is that how you publish those disclosures? And do you have any concerns about who might be harvesting that information? And along those same lines, if the company doesn't respond, do you ever go directly to the users of the software, who are the ones who are obviously going to pay the price? Because it's the open internet get exploited.
Okay, so 3 questions there. I'm probably going to forget. I'm going to answer see if I can remember the first one and answer that, but then badger me for the second 2 if I get it wrong. So the first question was about method of publication, like when a deadline is exceeded, how do we go about doing the publication? That's a good question because we recently rewrote the policy for that along with changing the deadline rules and the grace period. But since then, I think we've really used it because people are not missing deadlines anymore generally. But what we do is, if you want to see a deadline miss get published in real time, our bug tracker is where the actual information is stored and where the view restriction is removed when it's time, when the deadline is exceeded. we're going to do, for anything we think is a deadline miss for a bug that is not a trivial bug, is a bug that maybe people should be paying attention to, we're going to probably do an advisory format for that. It's not even clear to us where the best place is to post advisories these days. Our blog is a bit more for like stories and prose around detailed research, not so much for little announcements. There are some mailing lists that over the course of history have been good for announcing vulnerabilities, but they're kind of falling into disuse. So maybe for, yeah.
I'm sorry, just to kind of clarify, it just seems like if there's a vulnerability on a product, the big risk is on the users, not on the company selling the software. And being able to get the word out as quickly and as broadly as possible might be better for igniting some kind of action. Whereas if you publish it discreetly, you still have a huge user base who is unaware that they're vulnerable. And I'm wondering, how do you deal with that?
Right, that's a good observation. So publishing a deadline miss discreetly has a certain risk to it. So that's why we were trying to work out how to publish something more broadly. So I take that as a vote that we should just publish on our blog if we get a deadline miss or something like that, because that does tend to get picked up and reported upon. So yeah, that's useful feedback. What was your third question? I knew I'd missed. I knew I'd.
I was asking, do you ever actually go to large users of the software as opposed to, like, say you find an Adobe issue or something. Do you ever report that to the government or to large corporations that might be heavily impacted by that particular bug to warn them that they have a vulnerability?
That's an interesting question. So who do we tell about a vulnerability? Currently, we've kept it simple. We believe that the relationship is between of vulnerability discovery is between the person who found it and the person who can fix it. We tried looking at who do we share this information with, and it gets pretty gnarly pretty quickly. Like, why is this company large enough to deserve that information and this company is not? If we give it to this particular government, say the U.S. government, should we give it to the Russian government? Should we give it to the Chinese government? Right? We don't play national favorites. We just advocate for the safety of the open internet for everyone, right? So it gets gnarly quickly. So for now, we've kept it simple, if that answers your question.
Thank you. Over there, Chris.
Just wondering what your thoughts are on some of the bug bounty programs that are popping up. If you're collaborating with them at all, if that's a space for you guys.
So the question is, what about bug bounty programs? This is an area of interest to me personally. Outside of Project Zero, I've worked on the Chromium bug bounty program for the Chrome browser, the Google Web vulnerability program. There is some overlap here at the moment. I also work with the Internet Bug Bounty, which is like an industry-wide bug bounty for important software that otherwise does not have a bug bounty. I do see some overlap here. For example, some of the targets that we're interested in are covered by bug bounties. If I go back to the target list, Firefox and Chrome both have their own bug bounty programs. And yeah, we're pro bug bounty programs. What they do is they, it's all right. Bug bounty programs motivate more people to come forward and do their research in the open. That's one of the key tenets of our team. So yeah, we're very pro bug bounty programs. We might even launch one ourselves. We might even launch a Project Zero bug bounty program. Again, this is like very early thinking. I'm not announcing something here. I'm just announcing an intent to think about something. It's a bit meta, isn't it? But if you have any thoughts on something we could do that would look awesome and work well in this space, yeah, happy to receive ideas. Sure.
Are you seeing any compression on pricing in the black market or open market for bugs as a result of your research?
Are we seeing any compression on pricing? Compression to me implies like shrinking, but yeah, expansion in prices. I mean, if you go and look for the data that's been published and if you trust it, the prices have been going steadily up for the past few years. Project Zero has not been around long enough for us to quite hear any or make any specific links about Project Zero pushing prices up. Also, we're a bit coy about what we publish in this space because some of the things we hear are we'd rather, I don't know, not burn a source kind of thing. But yeah, prices are going up, we think. Question number 4, yes.
On your pie chart that Google itself actually had a fairly small slice, which kind of surprised me considering the growth of Android and Chrome OS and things like that. Is that because that's handled in-house separately, or are you guys actually looking equally at your own products as well?
That's a really good question. Like, why is the Google slice so small, I guess, as a summary. So we don't, when Project Zero sits down and thinks about what to look at, we don't feel like Google employees when we do this. We just happen to be funded by Google, is the way I put it to anyone who will listen. I don't feel like I'm a Google employee particularly. I just feel like Google is like funding my playground, right? So when we sit down, Google gets factored in. Google products get factored into our equations exactly the same as any other vendor does. So the reason that that slice is so small, I can make some guesses. I'm not sure if these are true, but I mean we've looked at Google Chrome. I think that the reason that we didn't find much there is because it's hard. One of the reasons it's hard is Google Chrome's had a really popular bug bounty program for the past many years. So a lot of the bugs have been picked clean by the wider community, right? We've started looking at Android. We found a bunch of bugs there. Another reason that slice is so small is because the overall figure is 427. So that slice might easily represent, I don't know, 10, 20 bugs. We found a bunch of interesting Android bugs as part of our research. I think that's public now. Another reason that slice is small is that the person, or the couple of people that did some Android research, decided to go after difficult, high-value bugs, as opposed to maybe lesser severity bugs. And some bugs were found and fixed. These are all, I can't give you like a coherent "this is why" answer, but there are lots of little factors that factor into why that slice is small. I guess it's not for lack of looking. Yes.
0 days are always kind of a hit, you know, whether it's the attacker that's using it or the research publishes big news drives government policy. It seems like more and more government incumbents are coming out with laws and regulations that kind of close in, which is kind of antithetical to what you're talking about. I agree with your philosophy. So what can we do as researchers or masses kind of shape government policy to keep them from closing down?
That's a great question. So what can we do as researchers to shape government policy to stop them clamping down on security research? Most obviously get involved. There's currently a feedback period going on for US Wassenaar regulation implementation. And part of that is a solicitation of open feedback. And they are currently receiving, I believe, robust feedback. But if you have some robust feedback to add, that certainly wouldn't hurt. Where that feedback is obviously making it very clear that the intent and letter of that law are to not put any restrictions on research done in the open. That's the main thrust of the feedback going on there. And that is the intent of the Wassenaar, actually. There is a public domain exemption in the European version, but it's not come across entirely clearly in the US version, best I can tell. So any clarification there is by giving feedback is very powerful. I think just the act of doing good research in the open, it's drying up, right? But anyone that can do good research in the open and make sure that it's something that a lot of people are doing, it makes it, if it's a thing that a lot of people are doing and it's backed by large corporations like Project Zero is, then it gets harder to marginalize. I think so the more people that do this, that also will help. I feel like I should have a better answer to that question. It's a good question, but that's what I've got. Okay. No more questions? I think we'll call it.